Rosa had been working at the fancy downtown hotel for almost 3 years now. Every day she put on her black uniform and walked through doors that cost more than what she made in 6 months. The Golden Crown Hotel was the kind of place where movie stars stayed and business deals worth millions happened over lunch. She knew every corner of that building, the marble floors that she had to be careful not to slip on when they were freshly cleaned, the crystal chandeliers that threw tiny rainbows on the walls when the afternoon sun hit them just right, the thick carpets in the dining room that made her feet feel like she was walking on clouds after standing for 10 hours straight. Tonight was special, though. The hotel was hosting one of those big charity events where rich people came to feel good about themselves while eating food that cost more per plate than Rosa made in a week. This time it was for some classical music foundation. She had worked plenty of these events before, but something felt different about tonight. The guests started arriving around 6 in the evening. Rosa watched them from behind the kitchen doors as they stepped out of cars that probably cost more than her family's house back home. The women wore dresses that sparkled under the lights, and the men had suits that looked like they were made just for them. They talked in low voices about things Rosa didn't understand: stock markets, art collections, vacation homes in places she had only seen in movies. Rosa moved between the tables like a ghost. She filled water glasses, brought bread, cleared plates. Most of the time, these people looked right through her like she wasn't even there. She had gotten used to it. Sometimes she wondered what it would be like to sit at one of those tables, instead of serving them. The ballroom was decorated with white flowers and golden ribbons. A big black piano sat on the stage like a sleeping giant. Rosa had always loved that piano. Sometimes, when she was cleaning the ballroom late at night, she would run her fingers over its keys very quietly. She never pressed hard enough to make a sound. She was too scared someone would hear and get her in trouble. As the evening went on, Rosa noticed a young man sitting backstage. He looked nervous, really nervous. His hands were shaking, and he kept wiping sweat from his face even though the room wasn't hot. She had seen that look before. It was the same look her little brother got before his school presentations. This must be the musician everyone was waiting to hear. Rosa had heard the staff talking about tonight's performance. Some famous young pianist was going to play a really difficult piece. The kind of music that made people close their eyes and forget about everything else for a while. Rosa knew about that feeling. Music had always been her escape, even when everything else in life felt impossible. She continued serving, but she kept watching that young man backstage. Something in her gut told her this night was going to be different. She just didn't know how different it would actually turn out to be. The young pianist's name was David, and he was supposed to be the star of the whole evening. Rosa had overheard the event organizers talking about him earlier. He was only 22, fresh out of one of those fancy music schools, and this was supposed to be his big break. The kind of performance that could change a person's whole life. But David didn't look ready for anything except maybe throwing up. Rosa watched him from the service hallway as he paced back and forth, his face getting paler by the minute. She had seen panic before. Her own mother used to get like this before job interviews. The shaking hands, the quick breathing, the look in his eyes like he wanted to run away and never come back. Then it happened. Just 20 minutes before he was supposed to go on stage, David collapsed. Not dramatically like in the movies, but more like his legs just gave up on him. Rosa was the first one to see it happen. She dropped her tray of dirty dishes and ran to help him. "I can't do this," David whispered when Rosa knelt beside him. "All those people out there, they're expecting so much. What if I mess up? What if I forget the music? My whole career could be over before it even starts." Rosa helped him sit up against the wall. She recognized that feeling, the weight of other people's expectations crushing down until you couldn't breathe. She had felt it herself many times, just in different situations. The event coordinator, a stressed-looking woman named Ms. Peterson, came rushing over when she heard the commotion. When she saw David sitting on the floor, looking like he might pass out again, her face went white. "This can't be happening," Ms. Peterson muttered, checking her watch. "We have 300 people out there who paid $1,000 each to hear this performance. The foundation is counting on tonight's donations. We can't just cancel." She started making frantic phone calls trying to find another pianist who could step in at the last minute. But it was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Most musicians were either already performing somewhere else or impossible to reach on such short notice. Rosa stood there listening to all this chaos, and something strange started happening in her chest. It was like a tiny voice was getting louder and louder, telling her something she didn't want to hear. She knew that piece of music. She knew it better than she knew her own reflection. For the past 6 months, Rosa had been sneaking into the ballroom during her breaks to practice on that big black piano. She was always careful. She only played when the hotel was quiet and she made sure no one was around to hear. But she had played that exact piece dozens of times. Her grandmother had taught it to her years ago, back when Rosa still believed she might become a real musician someday. The voice in her head got louder. She tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. Ms. Peterson was still on her phone, getting more desperate with each call. David was sitting there looking defeated. And in the ballroom, 300 wealthy people were getting impatient, probably checking their expensive watches and wondering if they had wasted their evening. Rosa's hands were shaking now, but not from fear. They were shaking from the crazy idea that was forming in her mind. An idea so ridiculous that it might actually work. Rosa took a deep breath and walked up to Ms. Peterson, who was still frantically trying to find a replacement pianist. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might jump right out of her chest. "Excuse me," Rosa said quietly. Ms. Peterson looked at her with the kind of expression people get when they're interrupted during a crisis, annoyed and confused. "Not now, Rosa. Can't you see we have a serious problem here?" "I know," Rosa said, her voice getting a little stronger. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. I can play that piece." Miss Peterson stared at her like she had just claimed she could fly to the moon. "What did you say?" "The music that David was supposed to play tonight. I know it. I can do it." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Miss Peterson looked Rosa up and down, taking in her waitress uniform, her name tag, her work shoes that had seen better days. Rosa could practically see the thoughts running through her head. This had to be some kind of joke. "Rosa, I appreciate you wanting to help, but this isn't like playing Happy Birthday at a family party. This is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. Number 2, it's one of the most difficult pieces ever written. These people paid serious money to hear a professional performance." "I understand," Rosa said. "But what other choice do you have? David can't perform and you don't have anyone else." Miss Peterson looked at her watch again. 15 minutes until showtime. In the ballroom, Rosa could hear the crowd getting restless. Conversations were getting louder and not in a good way. "This is insane," Ms. Peterson muttered. But then she looked at Rosa's face and saw something there. A quiet confidence that didn't match her uniform or her job title. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Completely serious." Against all logic, Ms. Peterson made a decision that surprised even herself. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe something in Rosa's eyes convinced her. "Fine. But if this goes badly, we're both probably going to be looking for new jobs tomorrow." Rosa nodded and started walking toward the stage entrance. Her legs felt wobbly, but she kept moving. Behind her, she could hear Miss Peterson announcing to the crowd that there had been a small change in the evening's program. When Rosa stepped onto the stage, the entire ballroom went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet that happens before a great performance, but the uncomfortable kind that happens when something unexpected and possibly embarrassing is about to occur. She could see their faces clearly from up there. Confused expressions, raised eyebrows, some people already reaching for their phones. A few tables near the front were whispering to each other, probably wondering who this random waitress thought she was. Rosa sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. She had dreamed about this moment for years, but in her dreams, she was wearing a beautiful dress, not her work uniform. In her dreams, the audience was expecting her, not wondering if they were about to witness a disaster. But none of that mattered now. Rosa placed her hands on the keys and took one last deep breath. Everything else faded away. The skeptical faces, the expensive dresses, the pressure of the moment. There was only her, the piano, and the music that had been living in her heart for so long. The conductor raised his baton and Rosa nodded. She was ready. The first notes came from the orchestra, deep and dramatic like thunder rolling across the sky. Rosa closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She had heard this introduction 1,000 times, but never like this. With a full orchestra, in a room built for music with every note echoing off the walls like it was meant to be there. When her moment came, Rosa's fingers found the keys like they were coming home. The first melody flowed out smooth and clear, and she felt something shift in the room behind her. The restless energy, the skeptical whispers. It all stopped. Suddenly, the only sound was the piano and the orchestra working together like they had been practicing for months. Rosa opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. The change was incredible. People who had been checking their phones were now leaning forward in their seats. The woman at table 3, who had been looking annoyed just minutes before, now had tears in her eyes. Even the waiters who had been moving around the room had stopped to listen. But Rosa wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for her grandmother, who had taught her this piece when she was just 14 years old. She was playing for all the dreams she had put aside. When her family needed money more than they needed her music, she was playing for every night she had snuck into this ballroom to practice, hoping nobody would catch her. The music got more complex, and Rosa's hands moved across the keys like they had a mind of their own. This was the part that most pianists struggled with, the section where the melody danced between both hands while the orchestra built up to a crescendo. But Rosa made it look easy, like she was having a conversation with an old friend. In the audience, people started recognizing what they were witnessing. This wasn't just someone who could play the notes correctly. This was artistry. This was the difference between reading words on a page and telling a story that makes people cry. A man at the front table leaned over to his wife. "Do you know who she is?" "The waitress," his wife whispered back, her voice full of wonder. "She's been serving our table all evening." Word spread quietly through the room. The woman playing this incredible music was the same person who had been refilling their water glasses and taking their dinner orders. The same person they had barely noticed, who had been invisible to them just an hour ago. As the piece moved toward its climax, Rosa felt like she was flying. Every emotion she had ever felt was pouring out through her fingertips. The homesickness for the country she had left behind, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the joy of music that had kept her going through the hardest times. The piano became her voice, telling her story to a room full of strangers who were finally really listening. The final section was approaching, the part where the piano and orchestra joined together in a celebration that sounded like fireworks and sunshine, and every beautiful thing in the world happening at once. Rosa's hands moved faster now, but every note was perfect, every phrase exactly where it needed to be. When the last chord rang out, the silence that followed felt different than before. It was the kind of silence that happens when something magical has just ended, and nobody wants to break the spell by being the first to move. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, then another. Then the whole room erupted. People weren't just applauding. They were standing, shouting, some of them crying. The sound filled the ballroom like a wave, and Rosa sat there at the piano, hardly believing what had just happened. She had done it. She had really done it. The applause seemed to go on forever. Rosa stood up from the piano bench, her legs still shaky from the adrenaline, and looked out at 300 people who were giving her the kind of ovation usually reserved for world-famous musicians. She didn't know what to do with her hands, so she just smiled and gave a small bow like she had seen other performers do. But the real surprise came when the clapping finally died down. People didn't just return to their seats and continue with dinner like nothing had happened. Instead, they started walking toward the stage. Important-looking people in expensive suits and jewelry were actually coming to talk to her. The first person to reach her was an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. "Young lady," he said, his voice full of amazement, "I've been going to classical music performances for 40 years and I've never heard anything like that. Who are you? Where did you study?" Before Rosa could answer, more people surrounded her. A woman with diamonds around her neck wanted to know if she had any recordings. A man in a tuxedo was asking about her training. Someone else was trying to give her a business card. Ms. Peterson pushed through the crowd, looking like she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. Rosa, there are some people here you need to meet. Important people. One of those important people turned out to be Dr. Williams, the director of the City Symphony Orchestra. He was a tall, serious-looking man who Rosa had served dinner to many times before, though he had never really looked at her until tonight. I want to offer you a chance to audition for our youth program, he said. And frankly, after what I just heard, I think you'd be accepted immediately. Another person introduced herself as Professor Chen from the music conservatory across town. We have scholarships, she said. Full scholarships for students with exceptional talent. I think you might qualify. Rosa felt dizzy. An hour ago, she had been worried about getting all the dessert plates cleared before her shift ended. Now people were talking about scholarships and orchestras and opportunities she had only dreamed about. But the conversation that meant the most came from a quiet woman who had been sitting near the back of the room. She approached Rosa after most of the crowd had dispersed. My daughter is 8 years old, the woman said. She loves music, but we can't afford lessons. After hearing you tonight, I realize that talent doesn't care about money or background. You've given me hope that she might have a chance too. That's when Rosa knew what she wanted to do with whatever opportunities came her way. 3 months later, Rosa was indeed attending the conservatory on a full scholarship. But she was also doing something else. She had started a music program at the community center in her neighborhood. Every Saturday, she taught piano lessons to kids whose families couldn't afford private instruction. On the wall of the community center, there was a small poster with a photo from that night at the Golden Crown Hotel. Under Rosa's picture, someone had written, "Dreams don't have expiration dates." Rosa liked that saying. She thought about it every time she sat down at the piano, whether she was practicing for her own classes or teaching a 7-year-old how to find middle C. The night she stepped onto that stage in her waitress uniform had changed everything. Not just because it opened doors for her, but because it reminded everyone in that room, and everyone who heard the story afterward, that extraordinary things can happen in the most ordinary moments. Sometimes Rosa still couldn't believe it was real, but then she would look at her hands, the same hands that had served countless dinners and cleaned countless tables, and remember how they had felt on those keys that night, how the music had poured out of her like it had been waiting her whole life for that exact moment. And she knew that sometimes when you're brave enough to take a chance, the whole world changes in the span of a single song.